I didn't even realize he saw me. That was the worst part. I thought I was slick, thought I was being careful. But apparently not careful enough for Ethan Harper, honor student, introvert, painfully sharp jawline, and even sharper memory. It all started during the midterm for Philosophy 2.0, Logic and Critical Thinking. Which is ironic, considering there was nothing logical about what I did. The exam was brutal, like absolutely mind-melting. I'd been working 2 jobs that week, trying to stay afloat after my roommate bailed on rent, and I barely even touched the review notes. I was running on 5 hours of sleep and a protein bar, and when I sat down in that freezing lecture hall, my brain felt like an overheated engine about to stall out. So when I noticed Ethan sitting 1 row ahead of me, just off to the right, I panicked. My eyes flicked down to his page. I only meant to glance, just a little help. A multiple choice nudge. I wasn't going to copy everything, just enough to get me through the first 2 pages, just enough to keep from bombing out completely. But I guess he noticed, because when I handed in my paper and turned to leave, I caught the faintest smirk on his face. Not the smug kind. No, this was something else. The kind of smile you give when you're sitting on something, a secret. Leverage. I told myself I imagined it. Until 3 days later, it was Wednesday. I was in the dining hall, trying to eat a rubbery slice of pizza before my shift at the bookstore. I looked up and there he was, Ethan. Standing at my table with the tray in his hand, like he did this all the time. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. I blinked. "What?" I said, "Mind if I sit?" He didn't wait for an answer, just slid into the seat across from me like we were old friends. I stared at him, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. Then he leaned in, voice casual, low. "You're not very subtle, you know." My blood turned to ice. He stabbed a piece of salad with his fork, like we were talking about the weather. Question 12 was wrong, by the way. You copied my original answer, not the correction I made. I was frozen. "I'm not going to tell anyone," he added. "Relax." I swallowed. "Then what? Do you want?" He smiled. Really smiled this time. It did things to his face I wasn't prepared for. "I haven't decided yet." "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, chewing thoughtfully, "you owe me." I opened my mouth to argue, but he cut me off with a glance. Not angry, just calm, dangerous in its own way. "I'm not looking to ruin your life, Derek," he said, "but you cheated, and I covered for you. Whether you like it or not, that makes us connected." He stood, picking up his tray like it was just any normal lunch break. "I'll let you know what I want. Don't stress too much." Yet, and with that, he walked off, leaving me sitting there, stunned, my cold pizza untouched, and the sinking feeling that Ethan Harper wasn't just bluffing. He was planning something, and I was part of it. For the next 2 days, I waited. Every time my phone buzzed, I thought it was going to be him. Every random hallway interaction, every walk through the quad. I half expected Ethan to pop out of nowhere with some cryptic message or demand. But he didn't, which somehow made it worse, because I knew it was coming. I just didn't know when or what. On Friday afternoon, it finally happened. I was at the library, fake studying for my sociology quiz. I say fake because my brain couldn't process anything. My thoughts were stuck on Ethan and what he might be planning. He hadn't told anyone. I was sure of that. There'd be consequences if he did, not just for me, but for the exam itself. It would be questioned, maybe regraded. He'd get pulled into the mess too. And Ethan didn't seem like the kind of guy who wanted attention. No, this was personal. Which was worse. My phone buzzed just as I was about to pack up. Unknown number. "Meet me at the coffee shop on 9th. Bring your dignity." I stared at the message for a second. Then I replied, "Is this Ethan?" No answer. Just another message. 20 minutes. I considered ignoring it, letting it go, calling his bluff. But the truth was, I couldn't afford to. Not with the potential academic suspension hanging over my head. And not with him holding all the cards. So I went. When I got to the coffee shop, he was already there. Of course. sitting in the back corner, sipping something iced, headphones draped around his neck. His posture was casual, but his eyes tracked me the moment I walked in. I slid into the seat across from him, the chair scraping a little too loud on the floor. He didn't look up at first. "So," I said, "this is the part where you tell me what I have to do, right?" Ethan finally glanced at me. "You always this dramatic, or is that a recent development?" I just stared at him. He set down his drink and leaned forward a little. "Relax. I'm not going to make you wash my laundry or pay my rent or anything." "Then what do you want?" I asked. He paused. Not for effect, more like he was actually thinking about it in real time. Finally, he said, "I'm part of a study group for Professor Reinhardt's Advanced Logic Seminar. We meet Tuesdays and Thursdays. Everyone else in the group dropped out." I blinked. "And?" "I need someone to keep me accountable, help work through problems, not just sit there. Actually help. You're in that same major track, right?" I let out a short laugh. "You do realize I'm the guy who cheated off you, right?" He raised an eyebrow. "And that's exactly why this will work. You've got more to lose." "I don't get it," I said. "Why me? You could guilt trip literally anyone in that class." He shrugged. "Maybe I'm curious." "Curious?" He gave a small, unreadable smile. "About whether or not you're as full of shit as you pretend to be." I wanted to argue, but he wasn't wrong. He slid a napkin toward me. On it, in neat, tiny handwriting, was a time and address. "First session's tomorrow. Noon, don't be late." I stared at the napkin. "So this is your big plan? Blackmail me into being your study buddy?" Ethan picked up his drink again. "You cheated. I saved your ass. Now you owe me. That's how this works." I shook my head, biting back a million things I wanted to say. Instead, I stood. "Fine, but don't expect me to be a genius." He didn't look up. "I don't. But I expect you to try." I left without another word. And yet, something about the whole thing gnawed at me. Not just the power trip he was pulling, but the way he looked at me. Like he already knew I'd say yes. Like this wasn't just about the exam. Like he wanted something more. I told myself I was imagining it. I wasn't. His apartment surprised me. I was expecting the usual off-campus chaos, mismatched furniture, pizza boxes, maybe a weird roommate or two. But Ethan's place was minimal, clean. Too clean, honestly. Like he didn't really live there. Or maybe he just didn't want anyone to know how he lived. A single couch. A bookshelf with a disturbingly organized row of philosophy texts and sci-fi paperbacks. No posters, no photos, just a small framed quote on the wall that read, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Fitting. He didn't offer me water, didn't ask how my day was, just pointed to the kitchen table where 2 notebooks were already waiting. I sat down and stared at the spread. Notes, problem sets, copies of old exams. "So what, I'm your TA now?" I asked. Ethan didn't even glance up as he flipped open his notebook. "No, you're my accountability partner. Difference is, you don't get paid." I rolled my eyes. Lucky me. We got started, and for a while, it was just that. Study problems, proof chains, logic puzzles that made my head throb. Ethan didn't waste time. He moved fast, assumed I knew more than I did, but didn't let me slack either. At one point, I groaned and leaned back. "Seriously, you're enjoying this way too much." He finally looked at me then, expression unreadable. "You mean watching you suffer through basic logic?" "Sure." "You're a real people person," I muttered. He smirked. "You'd be surprised." Something in the way he said it made me pause. There was this thing about Ethan I was starting to notice. It wasn't just that he was smart, it was that he was always watching, reading. Not just books, but people. Me. It made me feel like I was on display every second I was in the room with him. "So," I said, needing to break the silence, "why are you even in this program?" "You're already smarter than half the grad students," he shrugged. "Maybe I like proving things." "To yourself?" "To other people." I raised an eyebrow. "You really think they need proof? You've got professors quoting your papers." "Professors aren't the problem." he said. Students are. I frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Ethan's eyes flicked to mine, and just like that, the playful edge was gone. Most people just assume things about you based on how quiet you are. Or, if you don't talk a certain way, dress a certain way. You know, I didn't know what to say to that, because the truth was, I'd probably made assumptions about him too. You don't talk much in class, I offered, trying to shift the tone. He smirked. Neither do you, unless you're whispering answers off my test sheet. Touché. We sat in that weird, not uncomfortable silence for a bit. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "You ever been caught cheating before?" The question hit harder than I expected. I looked down at the edge of the table, ran my finger along the grain. Not really. I mean, nothing like this. High school stuff, maybe. Copying homework, swapping answers, but this? No. This was dumb. Desperate, he corrected. Not dumb. I met his gaze. Is that supposed to make me feel better? No, he said, but it should make you think. I opened my mouth to fire back something sarcastic, but nothing came out. He stared at me for a beat longer than necessary, then turned the page in his notebook. We studied for another hour. I think I got more out of that session than the entire semester. When I stood to leave, Ethan walked me to the door. He didn't say goodbye, just this. Same time Thursday. Sure, I said, lingering at the threshold. Unless you come up with some other weird way to punish me. He tilted his head slightly. Not everything's punishment. And before I could respond, he shut the door behind me. I stood in the hallway for a moment, confused by the way my chest felt tight. Not from guilt, from something else. Something I didn't want to name yet. Thursday came faster than I expected. I told myself I wasn't nervous. That this whole situation was just a weird blip in my otherwise average college life. I told myself it didn't matter that I had changed shirts 3 times, or that I'd Googled intro to predicate logic at midnight just so I wouldn't feel like a complete idiot around him again. But when I showed up at Ethan's door right at noon, I was definitely a little nervous. He opened the door wearing a black hoodie and joggers. Hair a little messy this time. Barefoot. Right on time, he said, stepping aside to let me in. Don't act surprised, I muttered, dropping my bag by the chair. I'm not. I figured you'd want to avoid giving me another reason to own you. I shot him a look, but there was no real heat behind it. You really enjoy this whole power dynamic thing, huh? Ethan smirked. Only when it's earned. We settled into the usual rhythm. I was getting better, slowly, but still had to ask him to repeat things more than I'd like. He never made me feel stupid, though. Just impatient sometimes. He had this way of explaining things that felt like he was teaching, not showing off. Halfway through the session, we took a break. He got us both water and leaned against the counter while I stretched my arms behind my head. You always study like this? I asked. Like what? Structured. Obsessed. Aggressively monastic. He smiled into his glass. It's called discipline, I shrugged. It's called lonely. That made him pause. Is that what you think I am? Are you? He watched me for a long beat, then said quietly, Not really. Just selective. It felt like there was something heavier under those words, but I didn't push. I just nodded and returned to the table. Okay, he said after a few more minutes of silence. Your turn. My turn to what? To teach me something, I snorted. Yeah, let me just open my brain bank of useless trivia. He tilted his head, serious now. I'm not joking. Pick something you know. Doesn't have to be academic. Just explain it to me. Let's see if you're any good at it. I stared at him, unsure if this was a trap or a genuine request. Finally, I said, Okay, I know how to make a perfect over-easy egg. He blinked. Seriously? Dead serious. It's an art. Ethan leaned forward, arms crossed on the table. Convince me. So I did. I explained the exact moment to flip the egg. The trick to not breaking the yolk. The right level of heat. How most people screw it up by overcooking the edges or not using enough butter. Ethan didn't interrupt, just listened. And when I finished, he nodded, like he actually learned something. "Okay," he said. "I believe you." "That's it?" "That's it." I sat back, watching him for a moment. "You're weird." "And you're not?" I opened my mouth, then laughed. "Touché." We finished the session, and this time, when I packed up my stuff, Ethan walked me to the door again. But he didn't open it right away. Instead, he leaned against the frame, eyes still on me. "You know," he said slowly, "I never actually planned to hold it over you." "What?" "The test. The cheating. I wasn't going to say anything." "Then why did you?" He shrugged, but it wasn't casual. "Impulse. Curiosity." I narrowed my eyes. "About what?" "You," he said, almost like it was obvious. "You look like someone who didn't want to screw up. But you did anyway. I wanted to know why." My throat felt suddenly dry. "And do you?" Ethan's voice dropped, just slightly. "Not yet." Then he opened the door. I left without another word. But I didn't stop thinking about what he said, or the way he said it. We fell into a rhythm after that. Twice a week at Ethan's place, no questions, no flaking. I showed up, we studied, he grilled me with logic puzzles, until I got one right, just to shut him up. And weirdly, I started looking forward to it. Not the work, exactly, but the quiet, the structure. Him. Ethan was different when he wasn't on campus. A little more relaxed, like he didn't have to keep up whatever mask he wore in class. Still sarcastic, still sharp, but softer in a way that caught me off guard. One afternoon, while I was trying to untangle a logic proof that looked like alien language, I noticed his laptop sitting open on the kitchen counter. He was in the bathroom, and I couldn't help but glance at the screen. It wasn't schoolwork, it was a story. He was writing something. Fiction, I think. There were character names, dialogue, even a bit of romance, though I couldn't tell much from the screen. I didn't get to read more before I heard the bathroom door creak. I looked away and pretended to be focused when he returned. He slid into his chair across from me, noticing the tension. "What?" "Nothing." "You're a terrible liar," I sighed. "You write fiction?" He blinked, surprised, then narrowed his eyes. "You were reading my laptop?" "More like glancing. Accidentally." "Uh-huh. Why didn't you ever say anything?" Ethan hesitated, then leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Because it's mine. Because people talk. Because I don't want a workshop full of undergrads dissecting how I use metaphors." I wasn't judging, I said quickly. I just didn't expect it. He raised an eyebrow. "What did you expect?" "I don't know, not a writer." "I contain multitudes," he said dryly. "Don't act so shocked." That made me laugh. Okay, Walt Whitman. But something about the shift, his sudden vulnerability, stuck with me, not because it made him less intimidating, but because it made him feel reachable. The next few sessions weren't as much about school. We still studied, sure, but the conversation started drifting. He asked about my job at the campus bookstore. I found out he worked part-time at a data analysis lab. We talked about movies, food, politics, nothing deep, but it felt different. One night, we ended up ordering takeout after a brutal logic set. He just barely passed me the last problem when he sat back with a sigh. "You're improving," he said, mouth full of rice. Still slow, but not hopeless. I gave him the finger. "Thanks for the glowing review." He grinned. And for a second, it wasn't about the cheating anymore. It wasn't about leverage or guilt. It was just us. A few minutes later, he asked something out of nowhere. "Why'd you really cheat?" I looked up. "We're still doing this?" You never answered. I hesitated, unsure if I should dodge it again. But something about the way he looked at me, open, not judgmental, made it easier to speak. "I was drowning," I said. "Work, school, rent. I didn't think I'd make it through the semester, and I panicked. That test, it felt like the last straw. I wasn't trying to be lazy or get one over on anyone. I was just exhausted. Ethan didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he nodded, once. That's fair. Yeah? Yeah, he said. Most people just lie. Or deflect. You didn't. I mean, I did, I said, half laughing. At first. Right. But you're owning it now, that counts. I didn't know what to say to that. We finished dinner, I helped clean up, and when I grabbed my bag to leave, he walked me to the door like usual. But this time, he didn't open it right away. Instead, he asked, "You ever think about how weird this is?" I frowned. What is? This. He gestured between us. How it started, what it turned into. I swallowed. Yeah, I think about it. He nodded, quiet for a beat. Just making sure I'm not the only one. Then he opened the door. But something had changed, and we both felt it. I told myself I wasn't catching feelings. I wasn't that guy. I didn't fall for someone just because they gave me attention, or challenged me, or made me laugh in that dry, quiet way that stayed in my head at night. I didn't get hung up on guys who were smarter than me, who could cut me down with one perfectly timed look, then turn around and explain modal logic like it was common sense. But I was lying to myself, and by the next week I couldn't even pretend anymore. It wasn't just that Ethan got to me, it was how he did it. Slowly. Without ever reaching out first. He never texted unless it was about our next session. He didn't follow me on Instagram. He wasn't trying to flirt, or at least if he was, he did it in a way that made me question everything twice. But when we were in the same room, something clicked. I don't know how else to describe it. There was a current, a hum. Like the air between us was waiting for one of us to say something neither of us was ready to say. Until that Tuesday. We were at his place. It was later than usual. I'd had a rough shift and showed up an hour late, flustered and apologizing with a half-melted iced coffee peace offering. Ethan didn't seem mad, just tired. You okay? I asked, watching him rub the back of his neck. He nodded. Yeah, just a long week. We worked for a while, mostly quiet. Then, out of nowhere, he closed his notebook and leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. What would you have done if I had turned you in? The question landed heavy. I sat back slowly. What kind of hypothetical is that? Just wondering. I swallowed. I don't know. Dropped the class, maybe. Tried to scrape together a passing GPA. Hope the department didn't blacklist me. I guess I'd have figured it out. Ethan watched me for a long moment. And if I hadn't said anything at all, I frowned. You mean, if you let it go? Yeah. I looked down at the table. Then I probably never would have spoken to you again. Exactly. I looked up at him. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't teasing. There was something different in his face. Almost like he was regretful. You wanted me to talk to you, I said slowly. Not a question. Ethan blinked, then looked away, lips pressed tight. I didn't expect it to matter. But it did, he exhaled. I don't let people in easily. I nodded, suddenly unsure of what to say. Then he added, quieter. But you kind of snuck in. That silence between us, that thrum I'd felt for weeks, it filled the room like smoke. I said the first honest thing that came to mind. You scare the hell out of me. His eyes flicked back to mine. Why? Because I don't know what this is. I don't either. But I keep showing up, I said. Even when I shouldn't. Even when you don't ask. I'm not here because I owe you anymore. And I think you know that. He stood suddenly, walked toward the window, hands in his pockets. I thought maybe I'd pushed too far. That he'd shut down, or kick me out. But then he turned, his voice low and sure. Okay, he said. Then let's stop pretending. My heart was in my throat. Ethan walked back toward me, slowly. No rush, no hesitation. When he got close, he rested his hands on the edge of the table and looked at me. Not the version of me he teased, not the one he'd saved in that exam, but me, bare. I don't know what this is either, he said, but I want to find out. And just like that, the whole world shrunk to this room. This moment. I stood, close enough now that I could feel the heat from his body. Then say something real. He reached up, his fingers brushing my jaw like he wasn't sure he had permission, but hoped he did. "I like you," he said, and I kissed him. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I just leaned in and kissed him, and everything else, every fear, every awkward start, every misstep that brought us here, melted away. He kissed me back, soft, focused, like he meant it. And when we finally pulled apart, his voice was a whisper. "I'm really glad you cheated." We both laughed then. A real laugh, light, uncomplicated. For the first time since this started, nothing about it felt like a mistake. I don't know what I expected to happen after that kiss. Some dramatic fallout, one of us pulling away, saying, "That was a mistake," brushing it off with awkward silence and fake smiles. Maybe I expected things to get weird, to snap back to student and tutor, to guilt and leverage. But none of that happened. Instead, he made us tea. Like nothing had changed, except that everything had. We sat on his couch, close but not touching, knees angled toward each other. The study materials were still on the table, but neither of us reached for them. He passed me my mug, still too hot to sip. So, I echoed, barely suppressing a smile. "Just to be clear," he said, looking at me over the rim of his cup. "You kissed me first." I did. "You sure about that?" I nodded. "Fully. I'm also sure I'd do it again." Ethan grinned and looked away, biting his bottom lip like he was trying to stop it from turning into a full smile. Good. Because I wasn't planning on doing anything about it tonight, but then you had to go and be honest. Oh no, I was honest. How dare I? He finally laughed, and it did something to my chest I wasn't prepared for. I think I realized, in that exact moment, I liked making him laugh. Not just for the sake of it, but because it made me feel seen. Real. Like all that time I spent trying not to be noticed had finally led me to someone who wanted to. We talked for a long time after that. About how weird it was. How unlikely. How he'd noticed me long before I ever knew who he was. That he'd seen me struggling in class, not just with the material, but with everything. And yeah, he caught me cheating, and yeah, it annoyed the hell out of him. But mostly, he said, it made him curious. "You looked like someone trying really hard not to fall apart," he said. I get that. It hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent months pretending I was okay, at work, at school, even with my friends. I didn't realize how much I needed someone to actually see through it. He saw me, and somehow, he didn't look away. We didn't talk about labels, didn't define what this was or where it was going, but he asked me to come back the next day. Not to study, just to hang out, to cook maybe, watch something, be around each other without the excuse of logic puzzles or deadlines. And I said yes. Weeks passed. Our study sessions became something else. Some days we still worked, but more often than not, we'd just talk. Lay on the floor, share music. He let me read some of his writing, only the stuff he wasn't too embarrassed about. I let him read the journal I kept hidden in a Google Doc folder labeled Laundry Tips. I stopped feeling like I owed him something, and he stopped needing to hold anything over me. One night, I asked him, half joking, "Are you ever going to delete the evidence?" "You mean the test?" "Yeah," Ethan shrugged. "I already shredded it." "You serious?" "I didn't want it," he said. "The moment you walked into that coffee shop the first time, I didn't need it anymore." I stared at him. "You're messed up," I said. "Maybe," he admitted. "But so are you." He kissed me then. And this time, it felt like something we both deserved. Final grades came out at the end of the semester. I passed. Barely. But I passed on my own. No cheating. No shortcuts. I'd earned it. We didn't tell anyone about us at first. It wasn't some secret, but it also wasn't anyone else's business. It was ours. And when people did start to notice, no one really questioned it. Maybe they figured we met through a class. Maybe they assumed I finally got my act together and landed someone out of my league. What they didn't know, what only we knew, was that the start of it all wasn't romantic. It was a mistake. A choice made out of panic, followed by a choice made out of curiosity, and finally, 1,000 choices that followed, quietly, naturally, until one day it didn't feel like a weird situation anymore. It just felt like us.